Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 61 for August 11th, 2017. Hey everybody, Daniel Rubino joined again by Zach Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast. This week we have a ton of news to go through, including a new Windows 10 mobile build. Actually, I think this is like 2 in a week almost. And we actually have some minor new features to report on. We'll talk about the big Xbox update, which is now going out to Alpha Ring members, bringing a new UI that is somewhat controversial, but we'll talk about the pros and cons of it. We'll also talk about the scary Consumer Report story out condemning the Surface line from Microsoft and my kind of takedown, or at least why you should question their methodology. Even though they may be right, we don't know. We'll also talk about Zach's eyeball stuff, specifically how you can use Windows 10 now with your eyes, or at least coming with the fall creators updates. And finally, we'll talk about the future of Windows 10 mobile, which is always a fun topic, which, doesn't bring out any opinions or passion from people at all. Zach, how are you doing this fine Friday?
I'm not too bad. How are you?
I am hanging in there. Been a busy week. No UFC for me this month, which is sad. August is it's the saddest summer month. It's just hot, boring. Everybody's on vacation, and I'm not going on vacation, so.
Are you not?
That.
Wow.
Well, got a house. So,
that's fair.
No, I'll probably take a vacation eventually later in the year, and I'll probably go and something else will get released, but that's fine. Let's jump right into the new mobile build. So this kind of came out of nowhere, especially because Microsoft's Dana Sarkar came out and said they don't expect any builds this week, that they found some show-stopping bugs that they're going to work on. So we just anticipated that, but instead we got a mobile build. So why don't you tell us what's actually new? So
the new mobile build this week, build 15.240, has I would call one noteworthy new change in it, and that's emoji 5.0 support. So this is actually something that I asked for back when Microsoft introduced the new emojis on PC. I said, well, I know Windows and Mobile isn't, Microsoft's main priority anymore, and there's no more big features planned for the platform, but I hope that they add the emojis. And here they are. A few weeks later, we now have the emojis in the build. Now, people have said, why has this taken Microsoft so long? Well, just because it's not really a priority for Microsoft, but it is here now. And it hasn't brought any of the new keyboard enhancements that you can find on PC, unfortunately. It's still the old keyboard.
Yeah, that's the sad thing. There's no search right here because that's part of Redstone 3. Mm-hmm. And as we'll talk about later, we're not getting Redstone 3 on mobile.
Right, so you've got the new emojis just sort of forced into the old keyboard, so you have to manually search for them. But they are there and they are listed now, and they do show up within apps on, like the UWP Twitter app, for example. Like in the previous build, if somebody were to use any of the new emoji 5.0s, they would not show up in the Twitter app or throughout the OS because they simply weren't in the OS. But now with this build, they are. And Microsoft also mentioned the Chinese lunar calendar support in the calendar app. Now, this isn't build specific, I don't believe. I think this has been in the calendar app for a while, but Microsoft has just been receiving questions from insiders asking if this is possible. Turns out it is, and it has been for a while. It's just via the calendar app. You just add the Chinese calendar via the alternate calendars area in the settings app, in the settings area of the calendar app, and that should show up like you would expect. And then there's just general changes and improvements. Microsoft says they fixed the issue where trying to update Windows Store apps saved to the SD card resulted in an error, so that should no longer happen anymore. And some Windows Update improvement that has happened behind the scenes. And there's a few known issues. Narrator speaks phrases in English rather than in your chosen long language. And the Elite X3 is currently having an issue with the new portrait orientation feature on Windows 10 Mobile Feature 2 via the external display dock, or the wide dock, sorry. And finally, when you're installing or updating a Windows Store app, you may see an error. As a workaround, you can get the latest app by uninstalling the older version of the app from your device and reinstalling the latest version from the store. So a few known issues to be aware of. But apart from that, this build, as most of the Feature 2 builds, are pretty stable. There's nothing super amazing going on with mobile right now. It's all bug fixes and general tiny improvements, which is a shame if you're somebody who was hoping for bigger features. Unfortunately, we won't be getting any bigger features, as we'll talk more about later in the later in the show.
I'm actually running it on my Idle 4S here, which I started using again this week because it's a really good phone. And I have to admit, with this mobile build on it, the way things have been going, it generally feels really nice. Now, it doesn't mean I'm still going to say anything different. I also happen to have the new OnePlus 5, and the speed difference now is getting shocking between Windows 10 Mobile and Android. This is a weird thing too, since Windows 10 Mobile, well, I should say Windows Phone 8, specifically Windows Phone 7, used to be all about the speed. We all remember Ben Rudolph before he became the head of retail. Basically was the "it seems faster" guy. Actually, he didn't originate the "seems faster" thing, but that was kind of a play on it. But Microsoft used to be able to boast about how it was just quicker to do things on Windows Phone because Android was so slow. But now this new hardware that's coming out for Android is just getting leaps and bounds faster than Windows 10 Mobile. Having said that, I still like the experience, though. It's been very stable. The Idle 4S, which hopefully the Idle 4 Pro you'll get sooner than later.
I'm still waiting.
That's why Zach's making those smirks, because it's been delayed indefinitely. Well, it's supposed to come out, next week?
It was supposed to come out Monday. Monday
okay.
Gone, and it's still not here yet. So I have no idea what's going with that.
Yeah, but I think the wait will be worth it. I mean, it's not a life-changing phone, but it really is nice hardware. I mean, it's just, especially if you put a case on it, and I recommend you. I just have this, I reviewed this case before, but it's a very thin case, so it doesn't add weight to it. But being all metal, that device is prone to chipping. But, say we'll get to the future of Windows 10 Mobile, but I will say, for what it is and where it is now, it's a nice operating system. It's a shame that it couldn't keep pace with Android, and that's definitely evident. I'm not even talking about the app issue, which is a whole separate thing, but in terms of the actual OS and the way it works. But as we'll talk about later, all this is important. Microsoft, these optimizations are all important for other things. Part of it is definitely for giving people just support who own these phones. They are continuing getting updates. And, to Microsoft's credit here, considering the future of Windows 10 Mobile, they're doing a lot of work for an OS that technically really has no more future, right? Or hasn't actually sold any real new devices in almost a year, and even longer than that. I don't know what other OS gets this much, for updates. Having said that, even people who own iPhone 4s apparently still get iOS updates, for better or worse. Though there is this legit conspiracy. So I'm running off on rants again today, but there is this legit conspiracy that iOS phones, or iPhones rather, when they get iOS updates, they purposely start bugging. I know a lot of people have older iPhones and they get the updates and all of a sudden they start having problems. Mm-hmm. And I love to just be like, come on, but I've heard it from so many people now that they come to me and they tell me, you're like, are they purposely doing that? I'm like, I don't think so, but it is funny.
When did the OnePlus 1 come out? Was that 2014 or 2013? That's a pretty old phone in the tech industry at this point, but that still runs Android incredibly well. iPhones, on the other hand, they do slow down a lot, and I do think Apple purposely make this a thing. Maybe it's just that they just don't optimize for the lower end hardware, which is what I assume it is, rather than purposefully make it slower. They just don't really care about the optimizations that they should be making for lower end hardware, which is probably why it slows down. But yeah, iPhones definitely slow down over the years. I have to say, I think the only iPhone that was sort of still usable after it was dropped support, after Apple dropped support for it, was the iPhone 3GS. Because the iPhone 3G got iOS 4, and that pretty much killed it. You couldn't really use it anymore because it was so slow. And I think the same happened for the iPhone 4 with iOS 5 or 6. It got iOS 5 or 6, or iOS 7 even, it got iOS 7, and that just killed it. It was too animation heavy and stuff. And Apple, since they don't do any optimizations for the lower end hardware, it was so slow. But when you take Windows 10 Mobile, not Windows 10 Mobile, sorry, Windows Phone 8 and 8.1, running that on a Lumia 520, that was amazing. And it was so fast. It was just as fast as the 920 at the time. So it is very interesting how these companies approach their older hardware or lower end hardware even.
Yeah. I think the funny thing about the iPhone case here, just talking about, is just that it's the closest thing Apple comes to what Microsoft has to face with the PC world in bringing an OS to many devices. People always compliment Apple for stability and everything because they build the OS and the hardware together. And while that works, the more generations of a device you do, and you have to, add legacy support, it becomes definitely more difficult. This is the issue Microsoft has with Windows 10, right? They don't just make the OS for one device. They have to do it for thousands of different types of devices. And, that's a harder task, but there we go. So that's the mobile build. Pretty good stuff, for what it is. We'll talk a little bit more about the future of Windows 10 Mobile later on in the podcast. For now, let's jump to Xbox, because Xbox had a pretty massive week this week. And one thing we forgot to mention at the top of the hour, it's because I don't think Zach and I use it, but Spotify finally landed for Xbox. And this, started snowballing about 10 days ago. We started hearing, I think, rumors about this happening. There was a leaked screenshot, but a lot of questions came up. But they finally announced it, and it's now available. And it was really interesting, if only because Sony had what was believed to be an exclusive on Spotify for the PlayStation. So that was always seen as a hurdle to why we don't have it on Xbox. The next issue came up with, what kind of app is this going to be? Because granted, Spotify released a Centennial app that is a desktop bridge app and through the store. But as we know, those apps can't technically run on Xbox. So what's going on here? Do they just write a separate app for Xbox? That seems weird. And, especially since there's a Windows Phone 8.1 app now, there's a Windows 10 Centennial app, there's a Win32 app, and now there's evidently an Xbox app. And that's exactly what they did. They just wrote a third or even fourth version of the app. Weird thing. I haven't been following the reviews or the chatter. Zach and I don't actually use Spotify. We're Groove fans. So, and for me, gets into that weird thing with music. Cause I listen to music, the gym, the car, that's about it. I really like Groove. I don't spend a ton of time with playlists and generating new things and all this stuff, but people who love Spotify really love Spotify. Some of that I do question in terms of, is it just because it's like people who go, I love Mac or I love PC? Is it because that's all you've known kind of thing? And it's just too hard to switch out of it. But for people who are huge Spotify fans, always nice to see. I think some of us would have preferred to see them make a true UWP native app that scales across all devices. But if you go by Microsoft's rationale, the concept of these bridges are to get companies to go, least amount of effort, put the app in the store. If it does well, we'll see about doing something else down the road. That is the point, and it seems to be working. So
I think right now, for Microsoft at least, it doesn't matter what kind of app it is, as long as an app is in the Windows Store, whether it's using Project Westminster, Islandwood, whatever the desktop bridge is. It doesn't matter. Even if it's a UWP app, which the Xbox Spotify app technically is a UWP app.
I was going to say, we should save this for possibly at the end we can do a Zach Dan rant about what is UWP. Because...
Okay, yeah, we'll save it to the end then. Basically, I had an argument with everyone on Twitter this week because I was like, the Spotify Xbox app is a UWP app. And it was like, but it isn't because it's only on Xbox. Like, well, you don't understand what UWP is. And for a minute there, during my arguing with everybody, I thought I was wrong. I thought, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake. But no, I was right. I was right. So
it is a confusing topic. We'll see if we can maybe do some rants about that. It's I feel like it's a topic we could talk about every week and still people will not get it. And part of that's on Microsoft. Part of it's just the fact that, as I mentioned, it's sort of like if we get into a discussion of quantum physics and there's confusion in our terminology or, assumptions, it's because it's quantum physics. Like when we start talking about developer stuff for developers and we're not developers, well, it's not my voice is going again. It's not a surprise that it's definitely confusing. So tell us, okay, so Xbox update. So they redid the UI again.
Yeah, I would call it a major overhaul to what was already present on the current release. It's not as big of a change as it was from the original Xbox One dashboard to the one that we have currently. But it's still a lot of noteworthy changes to take note of with this release.
I forgot what the old one looks like.
Right,
it's so funny. I gotta go back.
It was very different. But the new Microsoft released a new build for Xbox this week in the Insider Program Alpha Ring. I think they've renamed the rings already. But it's a RS3 build, a version 3 build 16257, I think it was. And this build includes a slightly overhauled dashboard with a bunch of fluent design elements and a sort of focus on speed. Interestingly, the new dashboard has been met with mixed response from gamers and non-gamers alike. Some people, on the other hand, really like the new fluent design elements, and they like how everything's a lot more faster. They like the new guide, which now is sort of a sort of fly-in, sort of hovering thing rather than stuck to the left of the screen, similar to how Cortana was in the current dashboard. And everything's vertical now instead of horizontal, which some people like, some people don't like. Some people don't like the home screen of the new Xbox dashboard. Some people say it uses a lot of wasted space, and it's filled up with a lot more ads now on the actual home screen bit, which not many people are impressed with, considering for a lot of people, Xbox Live is a paid service, and you shouldn't really be seeing ads on that service anyway. Now, I know people like Dan who say they don't really mind, they don't really look at the ads anyway, which I'm in the same boat. I don't really care. And to be fair, I find some of the ads quite useful because they are contextual, I believe. So they will show up and show you things that should be relevant to you rather than just generally targeted to a bunch of people. So, for example, if I'm interested in Gold, the game of the week, whatever it is, Microsoft will put a Games Gold week. What's it called? The gold thing where you get games of gold. That's it. They'll give me a games of gold advertisement in one of the advertisement boxes.
I forget about games of gold because if you're an Xbox Gold subscriber, you get like, I don't know, it's like 5 or 6 free games every month, and they change it every 2 weeks, and I always forget. So this is I think those ads and stuff like that are really good for people like me and probably you who are kind of casual users of Xbox. We don't sit there and read all the gaming news. We're not waiting at 12:01 a.m. for that game to land. We sometimes hear about games and, I've seen a thing for that. And even my best friend's like this. He's like, oh, I was talking about Fortnite. He's like, oh, I thought I saw something about that on the dashboard, And so I think for us, it is actually useful. And I get the complaint about the ad stuff, but like I said, it doesn't bother me. For future reference, I am a poor judge of UIs, or in the sense of I kind of know what works or what I like, but I don't get like visceral reactions to things unless it's really bad. But I like this new UI. I get the complaints. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I can't tell you how to make it better. And we have the same problem with our website design, by the way. We always joke around. It's like, I just know I don't like that. And they're like, well, what do you want? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not a designer. Show me options, I mean, but
I like the new dashboard as well. The only thing I don't like about it is the wasted space at the top of the home screen. Like now, when you select your game in the disk drive or that was last played, instead of giving you like a nice sort of box where the game image is, it's just a big sort of empty space just with the game's title in the middle of it. It's like, that's
sure.
I don't understand.
Well, some of that gets filled in if you're playing certain games. It's like a big, beautiful image. But then sometimes, you'll launch like an app and it'll just be like the title. So there are definite issues with there. I do like, though, like how when, like if you pin a game and you scroll down, like it just shifts like the whole background. It's very pretty when all the right elements are kicking in. And I think, part of this is we're alpha members, right? So we're seeing a very early release of this that's not completely polished, and so there's definitely, but I agree. There's some room here for improvement. But for me, as a casual kind of user, I use Xbox every day, but not for gaming. It's just part of my TV. I use Sling, I use Hulu, Netflix, all that kind of stuff. I love the new pop-up menu, mostly because I just find it easier to navigate, but two, it's just everything's faster on this. I just find it, I'm using a 1S, of course, but I just find the menus don't have as, I used to just hit that button and I just remember there'd be that second delay before something would pop up. And now I don't really exhibit that. So
I've noticed the games app, usually in the current public dashboard, if I launch the games app, it takes us at least 3 or 4 seconds for the images of the games to load in, like the thumbnails. With this dashboard, it's pretty much instant. Maybe it's a second or 2, but it's way faster than the old dashboard. So they're definitely caching the more things on the OS now for it to load up quicker. But yeah,
it was a big update too. It was 3.6 gigabytes. So this is not your typical.
It is. 400. They're moving from Redstone 2 to Redstone 3 with this build for Xbox at least. And I know that doesn't really mean anything for gamers, but for insiders and people who are interested in Windows and all that, this is the Redstone 3 base for Xbox. The previous insider builds up until the one that was released this week were Redstone 2 for Xbox. So Xbox does this every now. Xbox Insider program is different in the sense that Redstone 3 or Redstone 4 builds in this case will not start flighting for Xbox until it is Redstone 3. They don't start flighting for Xbox until a lot later in development, whereas Windows they sort of get started straight away, like let's do this. Xbox is a lot more like conservative, where we're going to work on this quite passionately internally for a little while. It's kind of a very old sort of Windows development sort of method how they do it for Xbox right now.
Yeah.
So they'll keep hold of it for a while, then they'll sort of polish up a public build, and then from there they'll release that and go, hey, here's what we've been working on internally. We want your feedback. And then from there they'll release more builds with new features. And again, this is an early build for Xbox as well, even though Resident 3 is almost done. For Xbox specifically, this is a pretty early build for the UI at least. And there's still more things coming. For example, there's a light mode on its way at some point.
Right.
There is the new Xbox avatars, which Jez Corden, our Xbox editor, had an exclusive on this week where he showed off what the avatars look like and whatever. So they are being worked on internally. And I'm sure there will be some other nice features and stuff that Xbox will unveil towards the end of Xbox. What are they calling it? The fall update for Xbox? The Xbox 2017 update? Yeah. So pretty exciting stuff for Xbox.
I even like the new selector. I know people are making fun of this because it's like it's a big neon bar that kind of goes around the things. But frankly, I didn't like the old one. I would sometimes this is the other issue I think there is with Xbox, which is app designs are not nearly as consistent, right? So companies have free reign to create any app they want. And as a result, I find in some apps, including Sling and HBO a bit, that when I go to select things in those apps, their selector is not as visible. I have to like move the cursor again just to see like where I'm actually am on the screen. Kind of like when you have a computer and you lose track where the cursor is. And so for the Xbox UI, I kind of like it. Maybe I can see how people think it's maybe too bold or something like that. I feel like, obviously Microsoft's problem here is multifold. One is that there are casual users like you and me who buy an Xbox, we use it for media, Netflix, HBO, and we love playing games on it. Then there's the people who are just like, I don't do any of that stuff. I just play games on this thing. And what Microsoft has to do, of course, is create a UI that appeases both crowds. And that's always very difficult. And we see this in Windows 10 too. People say like, they want like these 9,000 features. And then I think of like my friends who just have no idea what that stuff is. They just want a reliable, fast computer. And so, there's always one way around this, which I wouldn't mind seeing Microsoft do. I'd love to hear the pros and cons for it, which is basically offer users when they first start, like, do you want the pro mode or do you want the like lighter mode, And the pro mode allows you to do a lot more, shows you more information, or, maybe positions, your friend hub, more prevalent. Or do you want like more like a multimedia mode that's just like easier to use? I don't know. There's kind of interesting ways around the stuff.
Yeah, so the current Xbox dashboard that's in preview will be eventually moved down to the beta ring and the alpha and the subsequent rings after that. I think Microsoft renamed the rings this week. I don't know what they renamed them to. The Xbox Insider program is a lot different from the Windows one. It's a lot more confusing as well, which just makes no sense. But
you also love the fact of how they do publish their rings at like 6 p.m. Pacific.
Yeah, like which is 2 a.m. in the UK. Keep in mind.
Yeah, but at least it's like they announce like at 2 p.m. At 6 p.m. it's coming out, and on here the release notes.
Yeah, with the Windows, I like to the Windows Insider programs a lot more sort of. They're not as organized. I feel like where the Xbox Insider team it's like they've got 2 builds a week. 6 p.m. it comes out, 2 p.m. on the same day it's announced. But the Windows 10 Insider program's like, we might be releasing a build this week. We might not be. I don't know. And if we are, we haven't got a set time for it. It's just we'll announce it and it'll come out maybe 20 minutes. Or they'll tease it and then they'll announce it and then it'll be coming out at the same time they announce it. It's just for a company that's trying to unify Windows and all their platforms, having multiple... I mean, the Office Insider program is like a whole separate thing. Like, they do their own stuff. I think the slow ring for the Office Insider program gets more features than the fast ring sometimes. I don't understand that. So they all have different methods and different reasonings and different management, I assume. So
yeah, it's they're slowly getting there. This is all org issues, as you may hear within Microsoft. They're moving towards working together more collaboratively, but it's a process. And we're definitely not quite there. And I think the Xbox team is a perfect example of that. They're part of the Windows team, but also very much their own beast and maintain their own parameters for things.
Yeah, and I do assume that this update will eventually bring Xbox original backwards compatibility support as well. I do think Microsoft said that will be coming this fall, and if that's the case, it will be coming with Redstone 3 for Xbox. Whether that's in, the November release, which is when this update should be running out to the public, or if it's like in a subsequent release shortly after that, who knows at this point. But exciting times for Xbox, because I mean, this update will shine pretty much on Xbox One X. I think this is what the version of Xbox One X will be shipping with when you buy Xbox One X.
Yes,
when you power it on.
Yeah,
it should have this version. It might not. It might have the previous dashboard, but then you'll get an update to it, which is pretty standard.
So if you remember back at E3 when they announced the One X, they never actually showed it with a UI. They just focused on the hardware. And we, of course, at the time speculated, and that was more than speculation. We said that there's supposed to be a new UI update coming out for the fall, which is why they didn't want to show the One X with the current one. And then have it come out with a new one and have that confusing. So they didn't even show it. And yeah, it's a good bet that when you start to see 1X advertising, the real stuff, when it's actually going on sale, it'll be with this new layout and UI and stuff like that, which, should be a pretty nice thing. But definitely exciting times. You got to admit, there's a lot of movement going on in Microsoft these days, no matter what product you're part of. Well, except maybe HoloLens. We'll get to that sometime. Let's move on to controversy. So Consumer Reports they published an article this week, and they basically said they do not recommend people buy Microsoft Surface products, not one of them, but all of them. And they base this not off of their own testing, but rather surveys. So what Consumer Reports did was they sent surveys to their own readers, and they got about 90,000 back. Out of that 90,000, some amount had Surface devices, as they claim, and then they said they had problems. Now, if you're wondering why I'm being so vague and like what I just said, it's kind of funny. It's because that's actually how Consumer Reports basically wrote that article. And I wrote a counter article to it taking issue with that. Now, this is such a controversial topic. People immediately go like, well, of course you're going to go against Consumer Reports because they said bad things. You're a fanboy. And I'm not even necessarily disputing Consumer Reports' claims that Surface products may have a higher failure rate or have had issues in the past. In fact, I spent a third of this article pointing out and actually detailing those flaws that we have gone through with the Surface, and how, in fact, those probably did bias people who did have negative things to say towards that. Basically, if you bought a Surface Pro 4 or Surface Book in late 2015 or in early 2016, you probably did have a lot of problems with your device. And if someone asked you about it, you probably would be like, yeah, this thing had a lot of problems. And that is a legit thing. I think Microsoft has had issues bringing Surface online, which is part of the reason why, people complain, why aren't you just selling these worldwide? Well, because they need to build up support for these systems for consumer, support. And you don't want to be like, we're going to sell 10,000 of these things and then have them be lemons. So you want to scale up as you're doing this. And that's what we're seeing, right? As they get better at making their own hardware and quality control and learning from mistakes, they are getting better. And I really, truly believe that. I'm using Surface Studio, for instance. I have not seen a single controversy of this device. No one's going, my display is bad or the thing conked out. Like, you're just not hearing that. So the quality control is definitely higher. That doesn't dispute the fact that in the past they've had issues. Now, the problem with Consumer Reports was this. I mentioned that 90,000 number. Okay, that's a lot of people. That's not 90,000 Surface owners. That's 90,000 people responded to their survey. We don't know how many of that 90,000 actually owned a Surface. It could be 5 people. It could be 500 people. It could be 5,000 people. We actually just have no idea. There was actually no verification. They don't verify if you actually own the device either. It's just like, so if I get the survey, I could write in that I have an iPad and I don't like it, it's junk, without actually owning or using one. So there's a lot of methodological issues I took issue here with this. It's also weird. They estimate that 25% of Surface devices will have problems in their second year. To put that in perspective, I didn't even mention this in the article. Like, I think Dell is like at 20%. And so, like, it's kind of weird how it's just like 20%, that's okay. 25%, no, that's not all right. And of course, these are projected estimates. Finally, the other issue I had was that they based this off of a survey conducted about devices purchased in early 2017 and earlier. That precludes Surface Pro, the new one, and Surface Laptop. Yet they condemn those devices and put them in the same category, saying we don't recommend them because these older devices had issues. We're just going to assume Surface Laptop and Surface Pro are going to have them too. Now, that assumption may actually be true. In fact, I say, for all we know, Surface Laptop and the new Surface Pro could be worse. They could actually be just terrible devices. But it's still an assumption. And assumptions are not facts. Microsoft could have also really, improved everything so that the hardware doesn't fail, or, we just don't know. So it's a weird thing to be like, we didn't actually survey these devices, but we're going to condemn them too. The other issue, even though I said finally, there's a lot of problems with this. They don't define what they mean by failure. So when they say people had problems, they're just like, some people said it didn't turn on, and another one said that the screen sensitivity wasn't high. And they were just so vague. So they don't actually define their term. Like, does failure mean, the hardware broke? Did it not turn on? Like, there's just so many methodological issues here. And that's fine if people didn't take this stuff so seriously, because now CR is going to put this stuff out in magazines, and they put it right next to their ratings, which, Consumer Reports, when they do hardware stuff, are actually a pretty good company. Like, they do put things through tests, and I do trust them, but that's different from this survey stuff that they've done, which is not nearly as rigorous. And yeah, so that's my rant on that. It's and I take issue with the JD Power too, which actually favored the Surface. They said it's the most reliable device. Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest, I had no idea who Consumer Reports were up until this week. I mean, I may not be the only one in that. I feel a lot of people do know
Younger
them.
People don't.
Right. Yeah. This is an old medium at this point, I believe. And so much so, this is a big deal. Apparently, even Microsoft's Panos Panay made a sort of formal response via a blog post. And he said, the Surface team's mission is and always has been to make devices that deliver great experiences to our customers and fans. It's the motivation for everything we do, and we are proud of the Surface devices that we have built. This is why today's Consumer Reports survey is disappointing. While we respect Consumer Reports, we disagree with their findings. Surface has had quite a journey over the last few years, and we've learned a lot. So Microsoft's saying here that, we think Consumer Reports' survey results are wrong. Well, not wrong, but they disagree with it. And that Surface products over the years have improved dramatically. Microsoft says that both our predicted 1 to 2 year failure and actual return rates for Surface Pro 4 and the Surface Book are significantly lower than 25%, which is contradicting what Consumer Reports estimates. Additionally, we track other indicators of quality such as incidents per unit, which have improved from generation to generation and are now at a record low of well below 1%. So Microsoft is seeing these have their own internal numbers that they can see regarding products being sold and being returned, and they're saying that, hey, we're seeing no issue at this point. People are happy with their devices. Microsoft says that customer satisfaction for the Surface Pro 4 and Surface Book is 98%. So
yeah, I mean,
that's pretty high.
Microsoft's the only company that truly knows its return rate and failure rate of these devices. And no company actually shares that stuff really publicly, although this kind of was as a because they were pushed into it. Assuming they had like a 25% failure rate that, CR says that they did, there's a person who's responsible for that, and that's Panos, right? I mean, if Microsoft's pushing the Surface out and they're getting like this huge return rate and these failures, for instance, Microsoft Band 2, I think, fits into this category. Mm-hmm. That is not sustainable. And a company will not tolerate that. And they'll do one or two things. They'll fire the guy who's in charge of that and bring in someone else who can get that under control, or they cancel the product line. And we've seen that happen in the past. Like I said, Microsoft Band 2 is, I think, one example of that. That was, from what I understand, part of the reason why that was terminated was it did have a very high return rate, and it's not a sustainable thing. Now, Microsoft only knows those numbers. Maybe it's 98%, maybe it's 90%. We don't really know. But I mean, these are like legit issues here. But there was just, I think, a lot of, and other people will point out, well, Consumer Reports is, biased towards Apple and all this, and it's not really true actually, because it was only last year. They went through this with Apple. They criticized the MacBook Pro in their review, criticized it for a really bad battery life. But again, their methodology was suspect. A lot of people called them out on their methodology, which wasn't opaque. And then when they came out and said what it was, people took issue with it. And the way they did it was just very strange. And they seem to be, now, like you said, you don't know Consumer Reports. I know Consumer Reports because my father was an avid subscriber to it. Like I used to get the magazine every month. And frankly, when you're a kid and there was just like, when I grew up, just was not a ton of media. I used to read them, like I'm very familiar with their circles and everything like that. I used to read about cars. It was very interesting stuff. So I know Consumer Reports, but in this day and age, it's very much, if you're 40 and over, probably know what Consumer Reports is. If you're younger, you probably know what Wirecutter is, or our site. So there is that distinction, which also means that the Consumer Reports audience is skewed towards an wealthier, older demographic, which I'm not saying older people are worse with technology. I'm saying if I was doing a study, that is something I would control for. And at least, this is what I say about JD Power. Like, I don't necessarily agree with JD Power's stuff either, but they were way more transparent in their methodology. For instance, they ensured randomness. They actually contacted people. They actually verified people had the device that they're talking about and are familiar with it. And then they asked them a bunch of questions, and then they gave you the percentage of that. So they were a lot more transparent about their style. But then again, JD Power asked about customer satisfaction, which is not the same as reliability, which is what Consumer Reports was asking about. So it's controversial stuff. It's a black eye on Microsoft. I do end the article saying that, listen, Microsoft has had a shaky reputation with some of the Surface stuff early on. I think it's better, but it's up to them as a company to prove everybody wrong with this stuff. There's also this, finally, anecdotal evidence, which is, we see it all the time. Every time I do a review, HP, Dell, Razer, Chewy, Microsoft Surface products, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be someone in the comments go, I'll never buy blank device again because they have horrible quality control and their customer service is terrible. I can literally just pre-write that comment and put it on every review I do, because that one person who had a bad experience forever remembers that and it scars them. I know people who refuse to join AT&T because back when it was singular, they had a terrible billing experience 5-10 years ago. And so it's just scarred. They're like, nope, never doing it again. And that's a legit problem for companies. That HP faces this too, right? HP has had a pretty rough reputation in PCs that they're trying to overcome. And it's a very difficult thing to lose customers and try to win them back. And so companies are very sensitive with that stuff. But we have to be not confuse your own personal experience with a general trend, which is what this is trying to answer. It's like, okay, you had a terrible experience. No one's discounting that. No one's saying you deserve that or that Microsoft shouldn't have, done better. That's you. What I'm interested in is your case representative of, a ton of people, so much higher, that's higher than the rest. And that's an interesting question.
I do find it funny how a lot of people who are calling us fanboys for sort of defending Surface. I mean, we weren't really defending Surface. We were questioning Consumer Reports' sort of methodology for these survey results. And we're not the only people doing this. Apple sites such as The Verge. I've seen people from The Verge who are also sort of defending Surface or questioning Consumer Reports results.
CNET too.
CNET.
Really
I've seen sort of general tech sites such as Engadget. I've seen people there sort of saying that we're not too keen on these results from Consumer Reports. It's not just us. We're not just saying, hey, ignore Consumer Reports. We're saying, if you're looking at Consumer Reports survey, just be cautious of how they've conducted this survey and what it means and where the results are coming from. Because to me, as Dan says, 90,000 people, that's a big amount of people, let's be fair. But we don't know how many of those people own Surfaces. We don't know that. And to me, that means that survey means nothing to me. I don't care if they were very sort of specific in the numbers that they had and if they knew how many people actually owned these Surface Pro devices or these Surface devices in general, then I'd be more inclined to sort of acknowledge these results. But since we don't know anything pretty much about these results, apart from them saying that, hey, we asked a bunch of people, we don't know who these people were or what they thought about Microsoft or any company in general, and they said this, and so here are our results, we don't recommend Surface anymore, that's not something I can follow. And it's not fair for them to also apply these results to Surface Pro and Surface Laptop because, as we already know, these survey results were conducted for the products prior to the new devices. And I just don't think that's fair that they've marked all Surfaces as unrecommended for sale, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I left a comment. I'm not even, like I said, their conclusion could be accurate. It actually,
Right.
it could be. I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying they did a poor job of arguing for it. A counterexample, or, I should say, or rather an analogy would be, I could say the universe is actually made out of milk. I could be 100% correct in that. It doesn't mean you should believe me because I haven't proven it to you.
Right.
Okay. But I could still technically be right. Like, for all you know, I am a physicist. 100 years could prove that actually the universe is made out of milk. Dan was right. But I haven't proven that to you. I haven't given you any insight about how I arrived at that conclusion outside of some it looks during the day, it looks white to me, so it's got to be made of milk. And that's how, I was trained in science, and I used to get crucified. If I ever wrote in a paper, some people said this, a number of people said that, no one would ever take that seriously. Mm-hmm. You can't just say a number of or some people. That's not how this works. And if you're trying to make a substantive, empirical claim, which they do. They say 25% of Surface devices will fail after 2 years. If you're going to make that claim, you better be able to prove that and have the right data. And maybe they do. That's what bothers me. Like, they could, counter this and go, Dan, here's our data. Mm-hmm. Here's how our statistics. Here's how we did it all. And I could be like, you know what? I believe them. And then I could actually write that article saying, you know what, people should listen to CR. Microsoft's got a problem here. But they're not helping themselves. Why read their article as someone who's did science? I'm just like, no, this is garbage.
And even then, I mean, is it fair to say Microsoft still has a problem? Because let's be fair, Microsoft learned a lot from the Surface Book and the Surface Pro 4 launch. I think we can all agree that the Surface Book and Surface Pro 4 had a terrible launch. They had issues, software-wise, hardware-wise, you name it. There were problems of the Surface Pro 4 and the Surface Book. A lot of those problems no longer exist because Microsoft has released firmware updates and have improved upon their products and have learnt a lot for their new products. The Surface Laptop and Surface Pro really don't have any launch issues as far as I'm aware. Maybe small sort of selective issues that some people may be having, but nothing on the scale of Surface Book and Surface Pro 4. And this is, again, with the Consumer Reports survey results with the Apple MacBooks. They found that battery life was terrible. They worked with Apple, and Apple released a software update to improve battery life, and I believe Consumer Reports and Apple are now on good terms again, or whatever. Microsoft has already learned from their mistakes and have already improved upon them. So for Consumer Reports to come out today and say, hey, we don't recommend anything based on these old products, even though Microsoft has already done what they can to improve and fix upon these issues.
Right.
What is Microsoft supposed to do here? Apple had the benefit here, whereas they said, oh, we can see that this is an issue. We will work with you to fix these issues. Consumer Reports then says, okay, yeah, you fix these issues. But at this point for Microsoft has already done all of that. So what does Microsoft do here? Microsoft can't just make more issues to then improve upon just to make Consumer Reports happy. It's
just it. I mean, because Consumer Reports isn't actually evaluating actual reliability here. They're just basing it off of indirect evidence from surveys. If they were doing their own tests, they could go back and say, oh, we've reevaluated this, and now we can go to recommendation. But now they have to wait till they do another survey, which they, of course, won't share the data with us, and then just believe them. And, it's like, sorry, people. I'm not even like I said, everybody should be questioning all this stuff. Even like I said, I do in the article point out the flaws of the J.D. Power. The J.D. Power, same thing. They only sampled 2,000 people. Now, they were more rigorous, I think, in how they selected people randomly, ensured that they actually owned a device. But still, out of that 2,200 people, we don't know how many owned a Surface. So, and they don't actually ask about reliability. They just ask about, are you satisfied? And while those overlap, they're not necessarily the same thing. So, as someone who was in grad school for way too long and didn't even come out with my PhD, but you learn a lot about this stuff. And it's like whenever you read a scientific paper, the first thing you go after is the methodology because it's the easiest to. If you can knock down the methodology, the whole rest of the article falls apart. Like you don't need to even agree with the conclusion at that point because you just basically show the conclusion is not supported by the methods. And so, sorry, if you don't want people knocking down your methodology, then what you got to do is you got to write out every bit of thing you did in your methodology so that someone could not knock it down. That's just how this works. It's frustrating. Some people see it as nitpicking, but this is just how it works, okay, that was fun. The funny thing is that article was long and I could have written so much more because I just love this topic. I think it's super interesting because evaluating knowledge, regardless of your positions on things in life, is super important. I think people are just really bad on it because our schools don't train people on how to properly evaluate data and question things, but also be able to make a counter argument.
And I think it's fair to say that with a device line like Surface, you're going to get some reliability issues. Microsoft are really trying to push the bird out with a lot of their products. The Surface Book and its ridiculous hinge. That hinge doesn't need to be as ridiculous as it is, but it is because it's just trying to be different and something new. That hinge could break down way more than, say, a normal sort of 360-degree hinge. I mean, I don't hear anybody's having any problems with the hinge, for example, but
yeah.
But you know, if a company is going to try and innovate and try to get these products into consumers' hands, I mean, it's kind. I think it's fair to sort of let some of the earlier products at least have sort of some of these issues so that they can build upon and improve for their newer products. Because otherwise, all of the companies will be too scared to innovate because it's just too risky to put out a product out there which is new and may have issues that they even like a company can't test for. Like, I mean, Microsoft and all of these hardware makers have internal testing facilities where they sit there and you know, open and close the Surface Book 1,000 times a day to see how long this hinge would last. But you can't. Testing inside a laboratory and testing in the real world are two very different tests for a device. And
I saw one recommendation, but I mean, it would be cool, I guess, unless you're not for government regulation, if companies were required to report the actual return and failure rates of products that they sold. That would kind of solve a lot of this, right? It would still need to be, of course, if that was a law, it would still be quantified. It would be specific criteria, and we could debate about those criteria, but at least there would be some like consistent number across the board. That probably won't happen. No company wants to report on any numbers publicly if they don't have to. But that's a solution. That would be the ultimate kind of solution there. Even there, you still need context. It's, you know, like I said, if a product has 10% failure rate, is that good or bad?
Right.
You know, like, should it be 1%? Should it be 0%? 0.5%? 5%? Like, it's a very arbitrary number you end up landing on, you know? So it's sort of like, even there, just still, you know, debate about what's acceptable or not. But I feel like we could discuss that all day.
Yeah, long story short, believe who you want to believe.
Well, I mean, I think it's good to go read all, you know, it's what I do. You go read 5 or 10 reviews, and then also go into the comments, and then also read, you know, what customers write. Like on, you know, like Amazon, you have to be careful. Sometimes they have the verified purchase, which is always nice. Sometimes you have, you know, there's been companies who pay people to review, where they give the product for free, they send it to them, that kind of thing. But you can go to like Best Buy and, you know, and see what people are saying. You just got to do a lot of research, you know. I do this for a lot of products I buy. Sometimes you find a site that you just, you know, you agree with the writer. Like, you've bought something from them in the past and you agreed with them, and so you rely on them, just like a movie reviewer, right? Some people have their favorite movie reviewers because their tastes line up. It's a complicated process, but don't believe necessarily one source. You know, I mean, for instance, you know, case in point with Surface. Say the Surface Pro 2017 came out. Every site lambasted it, said it was terrible. It got 4 hours of battery life, and it was just awful. And then I came out and was like, yeah, it's 8 hours of battery life. It's amazing. Like, something should go off in your, you know, your little head there going, wait, something's wrong with Dan's review here. Why is it the outlier? And even there, I could have been technically right. There could have been, like, everybody else's device was broken and mine was the only one working. Like, there are, like, rational explanations for that. But these are things that people should be thinking when they're, you know, buying products. But yeah, you know, you're going to spend $2,000 on something. Unfortunately, you have to put some work into it a little bit. But.
Yeah. All right, moving on to our second to last story. I'll briefly just fly through this one. Windows 10 eye tracking. This has been a popular topic among insiders and fans and just people who are interested in this over the last week. Microsoft's most recent insider preview build, and I did briefly mention this on the last week's show. Microsoft's Insider Preview build now includes eye tracking, which is a pretty interesting thing. Now, this isn't a new technology by any means. This has been around for a while, but Microsoft is now finally building sort of an ease of access version of it into Windows 10 that allows people who may not be able to use mice and keyboards as easily as others to control their PC. And I've now had a good chance to play with it, and I can say it's really, really awesome. It's Basically, you have to use, right now it works with the Tobii Eye Tracker 4C, and you plug it in, you set up the Tobii Eye Tracker software, which has its own sort of apps and games and whatever. But then you have the Windows 10 stuff, which is essentially what it does is it allows you to control your PC with your eyes. So you have like a sort of mouse version, so you select the mouse with your eyes, and by selecting things, I've had people ask me this, you just sort of glance at the icon you want to select, and after about a second or two, it will select it automatically. And then with the mouse one, you can obviously look around the screen and then stare at a certain area for a second or two. Then it will sort of go into a more detailed mode. And then here you can sort of precisely move the cursor in that area where you want to select. So if I sort of glance at an X in an open window to close it, it will place my cursor around that area. Sometimes it will get it on the dot, sometimes it won't, because obviously the eye tracking technology, the actual hardware isn't 100% precise in where you're looking. It's more 98, 97%. Then that's what the sort of precision tool is for. So that pops up, and then you can sort of look at arrows and finely tune your cursor, and then select the left click button, which is an icon on screen, to close the app. And that's pretty much how you use the mouse. What's more interesting to me is the keyboard, the on-screen keyboard, which I believe is based on the SwiftKey stuff, because it has shape writing involved in
which is crazy.
I mean, yeah.
The ability to pick keys with your eyes is something that's been around for a long time. Stephen Hawking famously uses such a device, and there's lots of people who have muscular degenerative diseases that have used these, but we've never seen it sort of mainstreamed. Nor have we seen. It kind of blew my mind when you showed the swipe stuff, because that is counterintuitive. How do you swipe with your eyes? But yeah, tell us about how that worked.
So there are two modes to the keyboard. There's the standard sort of normal typing where you just sort of click on a letter and it would insert it. Then you've got the swiping one. The clicking on a letter one is with your eyes at least. You just look at the letter you want to insert, glance at it for a second, and then the keyboard will insert that into your text field. The swipe the shape writing, is a little bit more advanced, but it's a lot more easier to type, because as you can imagine, staring at each individual letter for a second, that can get tiresome pretty quickly and is also pretty slow. With the shape writing, what you do is, if you want to type out a word, instead of looking at each individual letter, you sort of just glance at the first letter, then quickly look through all the letters of that word, and then sort of stop at the last letter and make sure that the keyboard selects it and then it inserts that whole letter, just like it does on a smartphone. So if I'm typing, I don't know, because, I would, start on B, then just swipe through all the letters in the word because. You do the same thing with your eyes. So you sort of stare at the letter B for a second, then you look at the E, C, A, U, S, E, and then stare at the E at the end, and then it inserts that word into your text field. So it's a lot faster. And now I'm not going to say it's a keyboard replacement. If you are able to use your hands to type on a keyboard, then you're going to still prefer the keyboard. This is for those who don't have that luxury. So I wrote I think it was about a 600 word around 600 word sort of thing when I used only the eye stuff. And 423 words in, it took me about 13 minutes to get that far. Compared to a normal keyboard, I can write that in about 3 minutes. So it's definitely not as fast, but it's not supposed to be as fast. This isn't something.
Were your eyes tired?
Yeah, your eyes do get tired. I mean, it does.
Your eyes now jacked?
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of training for somebody who needs to use this to get used to it. Then again, there will be some people out there who only know this. People who are born today who may not be able to use mice and keyboards. That's the only tech they will know, and therefore it'll be natural to them. And I'm sure they will get lots faster at it, and probably be as fast as me typing on a normal keyboard at some point once the tech improves as well. Because keep in mind, this is still a beta feature. It's still got work to be done, and obviously the hardware can improve down the line as well. But it is, for a beta, it's a very promising first look at what Microsoft and Tobii. I
see what you did there. First look.
And Tobii, Tobii get just as much credit for this. They're the one working on the hardware behind, the actual tech. And they've got their own sort of software that does things, which is really nice. So, Tobii have been working on more entertainment side. So they've got their own games and stuff, which you can use, which is clever, I guess. And they're also working on stuff that sort of enhance the mouse and keyboard experience. So I think I described this on the podcast last week. If I didn't, I'll quickly describe it again. Basically, Tobii are working on sort of enhancements to the OS. So, for example, I can be staring at the start button, but my mouse is at the top right of the screen. So pretty much the furthest away from the start button it can possibly be. If I'm staring at the start button and I move my mouse towards it, instead of me having to move my mouse across the entire screen to get there, the Tobii eye tracker stuff can see that I'm staring at the start button and assumes I want to go there. So it'll just skip my cursor to the start button and I can just select it. So it's the smaller stuff like that is what Toby's working on, whereas Microsoft are working on the ease of access stuff for those who may not be able to use mice and keyboard. So very awesome stuff. I'm very excited to see where Microsoft, Toby, and other eye tracking manufacturers take this stuff in the future. I really do think it's a promising feature for Windows 10.
Yeah, definitely. And if you haven't seen it yet, make sure you go read that article. / you can go to our YouTube channel, Windows Central, and you can see Zach do a real live video demonstration of this technology. It's pretty cool because he does this split screen, so you can kind of see it all in action. We also have, if you're curious about this, the Toby device, the 4C, I believe is a little over $100. You can buy it on Amazon, have it shipped to you in 2 days, and if you're on the Insider program, you too could be controlling your PC with your eyes. Definitely very cool stuff for everyone involved and for accessibility advocates out there who are looking to join us in this new modern world. As this technology improves, too, you'll probably see it come down to smartphones or whatever we're carrying in a few years, which is, I guess, is a really nice segue, Dan. Congratulations. To the future of Windows 10 Mobile, or should I say, lack thereof. Zach, share with us what we finally learned, which had been speculated, but we should point out what we heard in the past turned out to be, see, this is a perfect example. We heard in the past that Windows 10 Mobile looked to be end of life. It was just basically put on life support. However, Zach and I had no actual proof of that or evidence through multiple sources confirming independently that information. So we did not report it. We did speculate that that could be a possibility. However, things have changed. We have now independently confirmed this. So Zach, now tell us what we know.
So Windows 10 Mobile's future is not as bad as some people were expecting it to be. I mean, if you're somebody who was hoping for lots of big new features and dramatic changes to Windows 10 Mobile, then you are in for a sad time. But if you're just a user of Windows 10 Mobile who's happy with the way things are, this isn't as bad as news as you're expecting. So Windows 10 Mobile's future has been in question ever since Microsoft moved it off to the Feature 2 branch. Now, Microsoft itself tried to sort of play this move down as not a big deal, it's insignificant, don't worry about it. But in reality, it was a bigger change internally than what was displayed to the public. So the Feature 2 branch, what it did was it sort of branched Windows 10 Mobile off development down its own separate path away from the rest of Windows 10 on other platforms like desktop, Xbox, IoT, and whatever else Windows 10 runs on these days. So Windows 10 Mobile, as you can tell by the build number, is a lot far further behind than Windows 10 on other platforms. And I know a lot of people say the build number doesn't matter, and technically I guess that's true, but in this case it sort of does, and it paints an easier picture for what I'm trying to describe here. So in short, the Feature 2 branch was branched off away from the rest of Windows 10 and was frozen at Redstone 2. So although Microsoft is still building Windows 10 Mobile builds and adding new features, the one core stuff underneath is still Redstone 2. The rest of Windows 10 obviously moved on to Redstone 3 and now coming up to Redstone 4 and further and further. Windows 10 Mobile will not be getting those Redstone 3 and Redstone 4 improvements. It will be remaining at Redstone 2 for the remainder of its life. But that doesn't mean, right now at least, that's the end of Windows 10 Mobile. Microsoft will continue to release new builds and minor features for Enterprise and other changes and stuff for the next year and a half, I believe, maybe even a bit longer than that. And they will backport APIs from Windows 10, Redstone 3, and Redstone 4 back to Feature 2. And now the reason I'm saying backport is because... excuse me. The reason I'm saying backport is because, like I said, Windows 10 Mobile isn't getting Redstone 3 and Redstone 4. So Microsoft will take the UWP APIs from Redstone 3 and 4, backport them to Windows 10 Feature 2, which is still Redstone 2 under the hood. And that will allow app developers to sort of build apps that target Redstone 3 and Redstone Store, but have them also run on Windows 10 Mobile. So Windows 10 Mobile doesn't lose out on app support as quickly as you would have originally imagined. And I'm hearing Microsoft will continue releasing new builds and supporting Windows 10 Mobile through 2018. And I believe it'll even support it with security updates into early 2019. I think that's a public thing as well. I think that's on Microsoft's own website, which is nice. So you can go and find that information. But the point is that Microsoft isn't just going to drop Windows 10 Mobile in the dirt out of the sky. They are going to sort of glide it in slowly and land it for people over the course of the next year and a half. And whilst this is happening, Microsoft are also expected to sort of kick off their next attempt at phones, which we still don't know much about it. Let me pull up my actual article here because I forgot what I wrote. So Microsoft, we all know, is working on what we're calling a Windows 10 Mobile reboot. And I don't think it's fair to call it a Windows 10 Mobile reboot because I don't think it'll be Windows 10 Mobile. Instead, I think it's going to be a different sort of a different take on Windows 10 as a whole. Because I have mentioned this in the past, I do feel Microsoft are pushing towards a future where there isn't a difference between Windows 10 and Windows 10 Mobile. It's just Windows 10 that runs on desktops, tablets, or phones. There doesn't need to be a specific version of Windows 10 that's designed for phones. Because, I mean, when Microsoft are a big company, they can sort of do the magic and make full Windows 10, sort of serviceable on phones. And I believe with Microsoft's next phone, it'll be running something called Andromeda OS. I believe that's a code name, and that's what I've heard. And I think, it's all very, very exciting. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, so, by the way, the reason I had to run out was because my HP mixed reality headset finally arrived. Super stoked. So I already have the Acer, one of those.
Right. Sorry, let me just quickly mention this. I forgot to mention this. So my contact suggests that Microsoft's next mobile device will be running something internally referred to as Andromeda OS, a version of Windows that aims to be modular enough to run on any form factor, and as a result removes the need for a separate Windows 10 mobile SKU. So this is why Microsoft is sort of branching Windows 10 Mobile away, is because Windows 10 Mobile is now technically redundant for what Microsoft is working on internally. They don't need Windows 10 Mobile anymore. So what are they supposed to do with it? They could either just drop it out of the sky and just end support for it right now, which would anger fans, current users, and OEMs. Because let's remember here, we still have Alcatel and we still have the HP with their Elite X3. They're still supporting their devices and selling their devices to consumers. If Microsoft were to just wake up today and go, okay, we're done with Windows 10 Mobile, those hardware makers will not be pleased. So I believe, although Microsoft are also just doing this to please fans, I think the sort of motivation behind this is just to keep OEMs at bay. Because if they were to drop support, I'm sure these OEMs would be pretty unhappy.
I was going to say, if I was feeling very generous, I can spin this out honestly as a good news kind of story.
I think this is a good news. The only bad news here is that existing phones will not be getting this Andromeda OS or whatever it is, which is why. And also I was going to say, I mean, and also the future of this idea that you're going to buy a phone in the future as you currently know it running a Windows mobile OS is dead. But the good news, I'll spin it this way. Of course, it depends on a lot of stuff. Windows 10 Mobile is being phased out because whatever Microsoft is doing next in the mobile arena, which, as we have said endlessly, is not necessarily a smartphone as we know it, that process is now starting. We are seeing the end of one thing and the start of something else. Now, it's hard to get excited for that quote, quote, something else, because we literally have no idea what Microsoft has in store. We do have some ideas, but not anything I can show you definitively. For all we know, whatever happens, Microsoft could cancel at the last minute, of course, too, or the world could end. But, in theory, everything tells us that Microsoft has an answer here for mobile. It's going to be a game-changing device, which we have mentioned in the past is something kind of that they need to do. This idea of just constantly releasing smartphones, trying to compete with Android and iOS on the same front is just it's pointless, right? They're never going to catch up with the apps there. So they got to figure out another way into this space, and you do that through innovation and pushing the category further by doing something different, just like how the first Surface brought this 2-in-1 concept, which people laughed off severely. I mean, it wasn't, I said, until halfway through Surface Pro 3 did the media and general audiences start clicking with that concept. Up until that point, even when Surface Pro 3 was announced, people were like, it's not going to, why they bother doing this? They're just going to lose money. So this stuff is kind of hard. Now, all this I'm speaking in vagary, so it's up to Microsoft to prove themselves, here. There's a lot of people in our audience who are going to be, listen, I was a Windows 10 phone fan for many years. They screwed me over. I had faith in them. And those are legit complaints, right? Microsoft now needs to create a product, some kind of device that makes that person go, okay, now maybe I'll consider doing that. And that's a tall order, right? For some people. And some people will just never come back. They're going to be like, I have an Android phone. But if Microsoft can create a product that wows enough, that solves a problem for some people, they could do it. But that's hard. I'm not going to, sugarcoat this. Whatever they're going to try to do in this area is going to be very difficult, and they better do it right, I think people who are expecting another smartphone or another phone as how we know it are really looking down the wrong sort of road here. I don't think Microsoft's next, air quotes, mobile device will be just a phone. I reckon it's going to be, like I say, a foldable tablet or whatever you want to imagine in your brain. So but I see someone in the YouTube comments here saying, as Dan already said, being scarred by Windows Phone, it's hard to go back. Yeah. But being scarred by Windows Phone, Windows 10 Mobile, Windows 8.1, whatever, Windows Phone 8.1, whatever. What Microsoft it seems to be working on internally isn't just a phone. It's more than just a phone. It's a device that can make phone calls, and I assume can fit in your pocket. But it doesn't have to be just a phone. Imagine. See, this is the problem with trying to imagine this stuff, is because it doesn't exist. This stuff doesn't exist, so it's hard to imagine it and hard to sort of picture what Microsoft are planning internally. And so, my advice is to just wait and see. You don't have to buy this new device Microsoft may release next year. You don't have to do anything. Microsoft will release this, and there will be people who want to buy it, just like there are people who want to buy the Surface Studio, and just like there are people who want to buy the Surface Laptop and the Surface Pro. There will be people who want to buy this Surface Pocket phone thing that they want to come out with. Just because it's not something that you want anymore doesn't mean there aren't other people there who do. And again, we've said this before, Microsoft are not trying to take down the iPhone or Android with their next Windows phone-based device. They're not doing that at all. This is because Microsoft can't win in that market. It's as simple as there's too many consumers in that market, and consumers don't like change, and switching somebody out of an ecosystem into another one keep in mind, Windows ecosystem isn't exactly app-friendly. Google doesn't really like Windows very much when it comes to app support and whatever. Apple doesn't really like Windows very much when it comes to app support. It's pretty much impossible for Microsoft to sort of rise up and overtake iPhone and Android with a single device. Yeah. It's not going to happen. So what instead Microsoft are doing, they're creating their own market for a different kind of person. And that's what they did with the Surface Pro. I mean, let's be fair.
It could be a very... If it's the right device and it's cool, like it could be a pretty awesome niche category for them. It becomes more than niche in a few years, right? Yeah. That's sort of the attempt here. But we're speaking in general terms because we don't know what kind of magic they're working on. We know from when they announced HoloLens, and ever since they've done Surface and Surface Book and Surface Studio, the company is clearly capable of creating really impressive technology. So my guess, too, is with this, they have to be aware of what they're doing with Windows Phone. And for years, people have been saying, why bother in this space, and all the negativity that when they finally do come out with this thing, it needs to really be their best foot forward. Not that they haven't done that in the past for Surface devices, but the bar is definitely set higher. When they kind of did Surface, it was sort of like, even the Surface laptop, it's like no one was saying, en masse, you guys really need to do the laptop because laptops are terrible. You kind of just did it, and it was just like, okay, but the phone thing is sort of like, you guys really need to do something here because this is just a disaster. And someone pointed out that, well, if it makes phone calls, it's a phone. And that's a weird thing because I
mean, everything makes phone calls these days. I can make Skype calls and call landline numbers. I mean...
Well, we also just don't go around naming things based off of a function it does. I don't look at my Surface Studio and go, gaming. If I told you the Harman Kardon Evoke speaker can do Skype calls and call landlines, is that now a phone?
No, it's not.
Because by that definition it is. So we do have to sort of get away from that.
I can see Microsoft sort of flipping how we perceive these kind of devices, in the sense that everybody looks at a phone and goes, that's a phone that also has apps and do other things. But even though for most of us, we don't actually use the phone function anymore. We just use the cellular connectivity for internet on the go, and then we might do everything else, our communication, through text messaging and apps and whatever. What about a device that's a tablet that can also be a phone if you want it to be? Why does a pocketable device have to be just one thing? Why can't it be more than one thing? And I think
the funny thing today, of course, is that the majority of younger people don't use their devices for phone calls.
Right, exactly.
In fact, it's like if you get a phone call, it's like bad news, right? It's just like, something must be really serious.
Exactly. So I mean, it's about time somebody went out there and said, "Hey, this is more than just a phone. It does all this other stuff. It's a pocket PC. Let's go back to that." The problem is that the term PC, to me at least, is such an old-fashioned term.
Sure,
we need a new name for computers, pretty much, for devices that we use to communicate with friends and procrastinate on and do work on. We need a new name for it, but who's going to come up with that new name?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
So, I mean, and let me just quickly round up everything I've said, because there's a lot here pretty much. So, Windows 10 Mobile, Microsoft will continue servicing it for the next year and a half, maybe even a bit longer than that. They will continue releasing builds. There will be new enterprise-specific features, security updates, bug fixes, and obviously a backporting of Redstone 3 and Redstone 4 UWP APIs, which means that app developers can continue supporting Windows 10 Mobile whilst targeting newer APIs introduced in newer versions of Windows on PC and Xbox and whatever else. But eventually that will stop. But before it stops, Microsoft will have hopefully launched, they're planning to at least, launched its next attempt at mobile, which will be this Andromeda thing, which as far as we know, may be a foldable device. It may do all this magical stuff and be more than just a phone. And Microsoft is hopefully going to have existing Windows Phone fans jump ship from that device, from their current phones, to this new Andromeda-based device. Windows 10 existing phones will not be getting an upgrade to Microsoft's next attempt at phones. That's not going to happen. You'll be remaining at Windows 10 Mobile. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Microsoft's next phone won't be running something called Windows 10 Mobile. As far as, Microsoft is terrible at naming things. And even if it's not the same Windows 10 Mobile, they might still call it Windows 10 Mobile. I'm going to assume that they won't do that, but with Microsoft, you never know. I'm assuming, as I said, they're going to sort of move towards a sort of SKU-less view of Windows 10 on these kind of consumer-based devices or prosumer-based devices, where it's like, yeah, this is Windows 10 on the Surface laptop, it's Windows 10 on the Surface Pro, it's Windows 10 on the Surface Studio, it's Windows 10 on the Surface Pocket. It's not just because it's something that fits in your pocket and you can make phone calls on it. Why does that have to be a specific phone version of the OS? It doesn't. So I'm not going to assume Microsoft are going to go down the route of calling it Windows 10 Mobile. So in short, Feature 2. It's a branched off thing. Your phones will continue to work for the next year or maybe even 2 years. There's no rush to jump off this platform. If you want to leave at any point, go ahead. Microsoft even encourages this at this point. If Windows 10 Mobile isn't for you, there are other platforms available, and Microsoft supports them just as well, or some would say better than Windows 10 Mobile. So go there. I mean, Microsoft are going to love you either way.
Naming is definitely hard. It'll be an exciting time. I think I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see what they do in this space, if they can really wow people. I'll be very excited in 2018, which is presumably when we're kind of expecting movement here of such a device, which would make sense as mobile support, ends in that year. You would expect whatever comes next to come next in that same year as well. Of course, things can change, but definitely a lot of exciting stuff going on. I don't know. It's a lot of mystery there, but Surface team is doing some pretty interesting stuff. So we'll just have to wait and see, but exciting times to be alive. I think that should wrap us up for this week. We're running over again, just over an hour. So, unless you want to do, I don't really want to do, let's do UWP next week. We'll do a teaser for people.
Yeah, I can't talk anymore. I'm done.
Yeah, we'll set aside, if you're interested in what is the Universal Windows Platform and why Spotify and Xbox is technically UWP.
And why I'm right.
Tune in next week during our podcast. I promise we'll devote time for a sort of in-depth discussion about what makes a UWP, and it'll be very educational and interesting and controversial as always. For next week on Windows Central on the site, if you're interested, we're covering a couple things. I'm obviously in a house now. I'll be setting up Xbox behind my TV, so I'll be reviewing this thing called Hide It, which is a really neat wall mount for the Xbox One S, which I've used now, and I thought it was really cool. I think I have some other review to do, and now I forgot. I'm going to be taking a look at the Logitech MX Master 2S, which is their new high-end consumer mouse. I also have a Logitech G904 or 03, I forgot. It's their new high-end gaming mouse. If you didn't see this week, I reviewed the Razer Lancehead, which I'm using here. It's this cool little glowing thing, which I like a lot. But then some people told me, it's a laser sensor, not an optical sensor. Don't you even know? I can't even. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I'm learning. And so I'm going to be taking a look at that too. Also a few announcements, and I should just tease. Oh yeah, I do have, of course, I'll do some write-ups on the mixed reality stuff. I guess I could show it here. It's a mess of wires. Maybe I can't. Let's see if I can. Yeah, here's my mixed reality. No, I can't. This cabling is just too much. Wait. There we go. Okay. So there's my mixed reality headset. That's the Acer one, which I think the HP one's better, but I don't know. It just showed up in a box. So I'll be talking more about that. I'll do a comparison. They're basically the same, but there's some different hardware involved. I also have in front of me, which I'm testing now, the new Razer Blade Stealth for 2017, which finally gets a precision touchpad. It gets, in my opinion, a better display with thinner bezels and all sorts of cool stuff. So I'll be doing a video shoot this week for that, but look for the review in about a week and a half as I guess spend some time with it. Zach, what can we expect from you?
Next week, I'll be doing a thing that people have requested from me quite a bit, a hands-on video walkthrough of all the Feature 2 builds of Windows 10 Mobile so far, because I haven't done a single Windows 10 Mobile build since the Creators Update RTM, because there's nothing to talk about, but I'm going to try and do one anyway. Then I'm also going to do sort of hands-on with this interesting app I found for Windows 10 Mobile. It's called Vivid Browser, and what it is it's a...
Is that what it's called?
No, not
Browser?
Vivaldi. That's
Vivaldi.
a different.
Vivaldi's very popular.
Yes, but this is a different app called Vivid Browser.
Oh, okay.
And this app brings the Microsoft Edge desktop UI to phones, which is very interesting.
God.
Right. So yeah, I'm going to take a look at that. I'm also going to do a follow-up on Skype UWP messaging and how that still sucks or doesn't suck. Because I'm going to, from Monday, hopefully with my new Alcatel Idol 4 Pro, if that ever decides to ship, I'm going to switch back on the Skype messaging everywhere thing. I'm going to try and use it again. And then I'm going to write up my results. I can guarantee it's going to suck, but maybe it's changed. Who knows?
I'll also probably have a post that reminds me of the Ring Pro. So as I'm finally juicing up my house here, I did get a Ring Pro, and a question if you have Windows 10 Mobile or Windows 10, how does it all work? If you remember, I did a review of it, I think about 2 years ago, and so I'm kind of curious whether or not it all still works and how is it. And yeah, good stuff. All about the connected home. Ring Pro is something I think if you have a house, you should consider getting, because it's a pretty cool device. Kind of weird too, but I'll be talking about that. So definitely stay tuned. We're going to be doing some questions live now for you guys who are listening to us on Friday. If not, join us on Fridays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time at mixer.com/Windows Central, where we do this podcast. You can join in, ask us questions, and have fun. Otherwise, you can also join us on Thursdays, where we tend to often do Microsoft Gaming Libations, where we game and chat with me, Zach, and Jez. And you guys join in. We also give away codes. We didn't get to do it this week. Everybody's too busy, believe it or not. Jed's got a lot of stuff going on his plate with Xbox, but we'll be back hopefully next Thursday. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in. Take care, everybody.